If Ben Stiller has taught me one thing, it's that museums are full of secrets that only reveal themselves at night, and that you should probably never play fight with gasoline. And maybe that nobody makes White Goodman bleed his own blood. Nobody. But back to the museum bit, it makes sense that buildings full of ancient relics and long dead individuals would take on a spooky air from time to time, especially if the folks running the buildings take it upon themselves to collect things of the extra morbid variety. I'm sure we've all been in a situation where we're visiting a museum and you take a wrong turn and you find yourself away from the hustle and bustle. In an empty hallway, you see a ghastly apparition. Or maybe the bones of some long dead organism move in such a way that you think the skeleton is looking right at you. You can talk to the curator, but they'll claim that you're just imagining things and that a ghost story getting out is bad for business. Or maybe I'm just writing an outdated museum movie by accident. Who's to say? Regardless, we've got some dank, dark depositories to discuss. Hello horror heads, and welcome back to the scariest channel on YouTube, Top 5 Scary Videos. I'm your horror host, Keegan Hughes, and today we're going to talk about the top 5 scary haunted museums you should never visit. Before we get started, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe for more ancient apparitions. Outrageous. Let's begin. Coming in at number 5 is the Pitt Rivers Museum. This archaeological and anthropological collection is an offshoot of Oxford University in England. It's known for storing and displaying all sorts of items from the collection of General Pitt Rivers, including an extensive amount of historically significant photographs and sound recordings. That's not what we're discussing here though, no. If we're discussing things that are creepy and potentially haunted, look no further than the Sansas display. There's a room at Pitt Rivers dedicated to the shrunken heads recovered from the upper Amazon region between Peru and Ecuador. Lots of folks think that shrunken heads are just pulpy tropes used to mysticize people from the Amazon for use in movies and adventure novels, but they were indeed a real practice made by the Shuar and Achuar people. In order to capture the power of a person's soul, they would peel the skin and hair off a skull, soak it in hot water, and then have hot sand poured inside. As the demand for shrunken heads increased in Europe, more sloth and monkey heads were used. I guess there weren't enough human heads to keep up with colonial demand. The museum displays contain one human head from General Pitt Rivers, and nobody knows how he came into possession of it. Probably some sketchy business. Since then, a few more shrunken heads have been donated to the museum, and they're kept in the treatment of dead enemies case along with other human heads. So if you've ever wanted to encounter a human soul stored in a shrunken head, or maybe just some skulls separate from the rest of their body, head on down to Pitt Rivers. But maybe don't look them in the eyes though. Coming in at number 4, we've got Catacombs di Cappuccini. And if just the heads aren't enough for you, consider heading down to Italy to see a massive collection of mummified bodies. Back in the 16th century, the Capuchin monastery ran out of space in its original cemetery, leading the monks to excavate crypts beneath. After mummifying a few friars, it became somewhat of a status symbol to be entombed in the catacombs, with many folks asking to be preserved in fancy clothes. In fact, for a long time, the catacombs were maintained through donations from relatives of the dead. Bodies would be displayed prominently as long as money was flowing, but if donations stopped, they would be moved to less easily viewed areas. Eventually, thousands of mummified bodies were put on display, organized by signifiers like class, gender, and profession. Nowadays, the catacombs are open to the general public, so anyone with an interest in preserved people can head out and see. Photography is strictly prohibited, and grills have been put up to prevent people from tampering from the deceased. But if folks were concerned enough to have their bodies dressed up and displayed, I would say they're more likely to stick around to make sure that it happened, right? In a tomb full of thousands of preserved bodies, there's gotta be a few ghosts circulating to make sure everything's the way they'd like it to be. Coming in at number 3, we've got the Museum of Torture Instruments. Now, we just wrapped up talking about well-preserved bodies, now let's take a look at some mangled and destroyed ones. I know for sure that if I got tortured to death, I'd be coming back to make the life of whoever did it a living hell. Put me in an Iron Maiden, guess what's playing at 4 a.m. full blast every night. Throw me in a rack, you'll be hearing my screams until you go deaf. Burn me alive, good luck ever escaping the smell of incinerated flesh. I've got to imagine it'd be the same for all sorts of folks. Dying in a terrible fashion does not make for a peaceful passing. So of course a museum full of the most malicious objects to ever grace the planet would be home to a few specters. Finding a home in Prague, the Museum of Torture Instruments has over 60 torture devices on display for the whole family to enjoy. From the flesh-singeing gridiron to some stranger options like the Spanish tickle torture, you can treat your eyes to humanity's darkest hits. And it's not just the magnificent machines themselves, there are also wax figures of poor saps about to lose their lives to make it all the more real. Is that crying I hear? Coming in at number 2, we've got the Museum of Death. Back in 1995, J.D. Healy and Catherine Schultz would write letters to serial killers. Often they would even get a note or two in response, maybe even some artwork. Then they would put all these deadly dastards' work on display. Eventually these exhibitions became so popular that it was decided that they would populate a whole museum, and so it went. In San Diego's purported oldest mortuary, the Museum of Death was opened. Over time, the museum has collected all sorts of different trinkets and oddities related to death and the people that cause it. Healy and Schultz even tried to acquire stuff from the Heaven's Gate cult suicides. The publicity resulted in them being evicted from their mortuary museum and moving to Los Angeles. The halls are full of fascinating and freaky things, ranging from baby coffins to the previously collected serial killer artwork to the purported guillotined head of a notorious French serial killer. Every year they host a Black Dahlia lookalike contest with categories for both pre and post-mortem. It's hard to imagine a place so obsessed with death not having a ghost or two to call their own, especially back when it was hosted in a mortuary. So if you ever find yourself looking at Jack Kevorkian's drip suicide machine and see something appear in the periphery, maybe back away slowly and try not to acknowledge it. And lastly, at number 1, we've got John Zaffis's Museum of the Paranormal. John Zaffis is a second-generation paranormal researcher with over 40 years of experience. He's been all over the world looking for ghosts and demons and other unnatural phenomena. A prolific public presence, he's starred in reality TV shows, made appearances in documentaries, and has been an expert guest on many a radio program. All of this knowledge about the world beyond our own has been put to good use in his very own museum. Many of the items he has collected over the years are held here. While some are simply curios from interesting places, Zaffis claims that a lot of the items held here are indeed haunted. He'll cleanse the items before putting them on display, although some are particularly active and must be kept in special cases. And if you've heard of Annabelle, you know exactly what that means. The museum showcases a sword used in satanic rituals, a military jacket that supposedly gave a girl vivid dreams of the battlefield, and even the Virgin Mary statue that the haunting in Connecticut was based on. It's kind of like Ed and Lorraine Warren's museum, but with a little less Hollywood scrutiny behind it. There's no billion-dollar franchise backing Zaffis, just a few movies here and there. However, this makes me wonder what might go on here at night. If the ever-prolific Warrens had trouble keeping the reins on Annabelle, you have to wonder what Zaffis is doing to keep his evil objects at bay. I gotta say, as much as I miss going to public places like museums and art galleries, I don't know if a haunted display would be my first destination upon getting my boot off. Just too many risks. What'd you think of the list? Have you been to any of these spots? Are there any haunted museums that I did not mention? Make sure you let me know down in the comments. Speaking of comments, let's take a look at some of your more tyrannical ones from the top 5 scary broadcasts live on TV. Tom Fink says Stephen King once said that we make up horrors to help us cope with the real ones, and these videos are proof of that. Yeah, fictional horror is a welcome respite from all the real ones floating around out there. Dan Turman says, I was in junior high school when JFK was assassinated. We were watching live TV when the police were transferring Lee Harvey Oswald and Jack Ruby shot him in the gut. To say the least, it was a traumatic series of events for America. Violent events that defined a generation for sure. It's weird to think about how many people saw that unfold before their very eyes. Dylan Ascension says, the outline around your face makes it look like a mask. Who's to say it isn't one? Iridon says, I remember somewhat the Challenger disaster. Was around 8 at the time, I guess. Couldn't understand why everyone was so upset. I thought it was a movie. Took me a while to understand how the news worked. It's hard to believe, eh? So many kids watched a traumatic event like that, which was supposed to be a major inspirational success. And Michelle Weir says, the most disturbing thing I've ever seen was the broadcast live when the second plane hit the World Trade Center on 9/11. Then the buildings collapsed. Scariest day of my life? I'm sure I'm not alone. It's definitely an image burned in the brains of many. It seems so surreal at this point, doesn't it? And that's all the time we have for today. Before I enter the Thunderdome, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up and subscribe for more horrifying history. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.